Black twin CEOs were denied VIP first-class seats for a white passenger. But before the plane even touched down, they bought the entire airline. They denied the black twin CEOs VIP first class for a white passenger, thinking a seat could define power. They didn't realize the twins had already purchased the airline and would take control before the plane even touched down. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always folds when true authority arrives. There's been a seat reassignment. The words landed like a crack in glass, quiet, subtle, but impossible to ignore. The terminal at Velker International was sterile in its calm, the kind of private airport lounge where discomfort rarely showed itself. Yet discomfort now stood 5 feet away, dressed in a pressed Airline blazer, nervously clutching a tablet. Reeve Tanner, a young gate agent barely out of training, had spoken the sentence with practiced neutrality, but his hands betrayed him, tapping against the screen, then curling inward as if hoping the silence might swallow the moment. Darian Creed didn't blink. "I'm sorry," he said evenly, his voice neither confrontational nor passive, but sharpened with the kind of control that made people choose their next words very carefully. Reeve cleared his throat. "You've been moved to business class. A special diplomatic guest required your section." Darnell Creed, standing to his brother's left, shifted only slightly, just enough to observe the gate manifest over Reeve's shoulder. His gaze never wavered from the agent's face. "We arranged those seats 6 weeks ago. Confirmed priority VIP, biometric lock-in. Override code from Airline's executive desk." His tone was cool, not irritated, but there was no mistaking the power beneath it. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly how the system worked, and when it wasn't. Reeve didn't meet their eyes. "I understand, sir. It's just that..." "Who exactly?" Darian interrupted. "Is the special guest?" Reeve mumbled something that resembled a title, but it disintegrated mid-sentence. "It's someone with government... diplomatic." Darian raised a single eyebrow. "Name." The pause that followed confirmed the truth more effectively than any answer would have. Reeve hesitated, then looked down. "I'm sorry, it's already final," he said again, this time softer. The moment stretched. No scene was made. No shouting. The Creed twins simply exchanged a glance, quiet, clinical, sharp. They had faced sabotage before, but rarely this provincial, and rarely this bold. Darian stepped forward first, handing over his boarding pass with deliberate calm. "Then we'll board," he said, "as scheduled." Darnell followed without a word. Behind them, Reeve exhaled audibly, relieved that the situation hadn't escalated. What he didn't realize, what no one at that gate seemed to grasp, was that escalation wasn't always loud. Sometimes it wore silence like a blade. As they walked through the jet bridge, the hum of the terminal faded, replaced by the muffled sounds of a cabin being prepped. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The situation had already pivoted in their minds, not as a minor inconvenience, but as a data point in a pattern. In the business world, patterns meant leverage. And leverage, in the hands of the Creed brothers, was never left unused. The cabin door greeted them with a sterile beep, and they stepped onto the aircraft. That was their first mistake. Victor Renner didn't even glance up. He lounged casually in seat 1A, swirling a tall flute of champagne, his expensive cufflinks catching the cabin lights with deliberate sparkle. A private banker with a reputation for arrogance, Victor already looked at home in the very seats Darian and Darnell Creed had booked months in advance. His shoes were off. His voice, sharp and self-satisfied, echoed faintly as he cracked a joke to the nearby flight attendant, who laughed louder than the joke warranted. Neither man acknowledged the twins as they stepped into first class. Darian stopped cold. Darnell's eyes scanned the placard above the seat. Reserved, Creed, D/Creed, D. The sign had been hastily peeled off. A faint residue still clung to the edges. The twin brothers said nothing to each other, but they didn't need to. Years of boardroom battles had trained them to communicate in glances. Darnell's left eyebrow twitched, just once. Darian's shoulders squared slightly. Their path forward had just shifted. They walked silently to the seats assigned in their replacement tickets. Row 4. The downgrade was subtle but clear. The divider wall that should have separated their seats from the rest of the cabin was missing. The armrests were chipped. The screens embedded into the backs of the chairs flickered, one of them frozen on a static image of a smiling Airline logo. Darnell slid into his seat and immediately tapped the corner of his smartwatch. A small red icon blinked to life. The watch's lens, embedded near the bezel, began quietly recording. He angled it up toward the seat, framing the poor condition, then swept it left to catch Victor toasting with the same champagne they had specifically pre-ordered. No confrontación. Just silent documentation. A moment later, a tall, blonde flight attendant passed down the aisle with his tray empty. He didn't stop, didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their presence. He turned his shoulder slightly as he passed, avoiding eye contact with practiced dismissal. Darian pressed the call button. It glowed orange above his head, blinking softly. Several seconds passed. The light stayed lit. Nothing happened. Then, with an audible sigh, the same attendant turned back. His name tag, slightly crooked, read Jace. His posture was stiff, his jaw locked as if physically restraining words he'd rather say outright. He leaned in, expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked. Darian's voice was calm but direct. "We'd like the full menu, please. The international selection." Jace's eyebrows rose, just slightly, before falling into a flat stare. "That menu's reserved for our premier clients." "We are premier clients," Darnell interjected, not lifting his gaze from his screen, which now displayed a digital receipt clearly showing VIP seating and privileges. Jace exhaled through his nose, his lips curled in forced neutrality. "Just doing what I was told," he muttered, spinning on his heel without another word. Silence returned to the cabin, but the tension remained, coiled tight beneath the surface like a spring waiting to snap. Darian's fingers tapped a rhythm on the armrest. His mind wasn't focused on the insult itself, but on the intent behind it. Disrespect in isolation could be excused, but this felt orchestrated. The reassignment, the absence of acknowledgement, the subtle denial of basic service. It all carried the scent of something more than a logistical error. Across the aisle, Victor let out a low chuckle. He tapped his glass again with Jace, as if to toast the unspoken power shift. The implication was clear. Some passengers belonged in first class. Others, no matter how they dressed, didn't. Darnell tilted his watch slightly. The red light blinked again. Then he flicked his finger along the edge of his tablet, pulling up a comparison. His current seat against the one listed in the confirmation file. He whispered, "Video log. Discrepancy. Seating mismatch. Downgrade visible. 1504. He didn't raise his voice, didn't react outwardly, but the act itself was loaded. They weren't going to make a scene. They were going to make a case. Another 15 minutes passed before Jace returned. This time, he held a tray with 2 plastic tumblers filled with water. "No coasters. No napkins." He leaned in closer than necessary, practically crowding Darian as he placed the glass on the tray table with a slight bump that sent the water sloshing. "Careful," he said, his tone thick with condescension. Then he pivoted to Darnell and let the second glass tip just enough to splash across the surface of his tablet. A beat passed. Jace didn't apologize. He didn't reach for a towel. Instead, he straightened, smirked faintly and said, "Shouldn't bring your little toys on a big flight," before strolling back toward the galley. Victor's laughter followed him down the aisle like a trailing fog. Several passengers shifted awkwardly in their seats, some glancing over but quickly turning away. No one spoke up. No one intervened. The silence was complicit, the kind that institutions specialize in. Darnell calmly powered down the wet tablet, wiped the surface with his sleeve, and tapped once on the watch. "Upload to secure archive," he said under his breath. Darian didn't speak, but his eyes narrowed. Beneath the quiet, he could already feel the tectonic plates shifting. What had begun as an insult had just become leverage. What had been discomfort had become data, and what had been a seat reassignment was about to become a turning point. They didn't know the Creed twins negotiate with empires. Victor Renner's voice sliced through the air like a dull blade. Next time book earlier, gentlemen. Or better yet, fly private. The smirk that followed wasn't just smug. It was territorial, like a man claiming space he didn't earn. Darnell Creed paused mid-swipe on his tablet, his thumb hovering just above the screen. His eyes didn't flicker. He didn't even look at Victor. Instead, a quiet nod passed between him and Darian. Darian tapped the side of his watch once, the motion subtle. A faint vibration responded in Darnell's own. The two men didn't speak aloud. They didn't need to. Years of leading global negotiations across volatile markets had taught them how to speak in silence, where words only slowed precision. The cabin lighting dimmed slightly as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the low chime of altitude confirmation pinging overhead. Outside, endless sky pressed against the glass. Inside, the boardroom had taken flight, and the board just didn't know it yet. Darian flicked open a small tab on his watch interface and pulled up their original booking details. The screen displayed the unmistakable confirmation. VIP First Class, Section Alpha. Private Divider. Executive Service. Personalized security clearance. He didn't need to scroll further. Darnell, already a step ahead, connected to Clivon Dynamics secured server using the private hotspot built into his cufflink. A few keystrokes unlocked their crisis deck, used only in cases of high-level contractual interference, government obstruction, or breach of executive authority. This moment qualified. He entered the code. Night Shift 3. The screen morphed. A blueprint of Airline's corporate infrastructure came into view, ownership tiers, licensing data, dormant holding patterns. Within it were two entities they'd formed years ago, shell companies created for quiet leverage in the event of airborne equity maneuvers. They were never meant to be used this way. But as Darnell glanced again at the back of Victor's head, he knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about message. He slid his finger across the screen, initiating a silent ping. Across the continent, in a glass-walled office lit by the glow of 5 servers, Attorney Riel Van leaned forward. His phone buzzed once. He recognized the encryption signature immediately. He didn't hesitate. From behind biometric locks, Riel opened a secure folder labeled Scepter Clause, Emergency Holdings. Inside, documents prepped for a full hostile acquisition of Airline's operational wing. The brothers weren't improvising. They were activating. Back on the plane, Victor twisted slightly in his seat, chuckling again to himself as he sipped more champagne. He didn't even glance their way, but the mockery hovered like smoke. Jace Halden, the flight attendant, passed them once more without eye contact. His uniform was crisp, his posture deliberate, yet every footstep screamed favoritism. The subtle distance, the unspoken dismissals, the hollow professionalism, all layered like frost on glass. Darnell's jaw flexed once. A new alert blinked on his watch. It was from Riel. Ownership packet acquired. Full acquisition offer viable. Want me to begin? The entire cockpit and cabin buzzed faintly with the steady drone of altitude. But within that stillness, Darnell tapped a single reply. Not yet. Wait for signal. Across the aisle, Victor Renner raised his glass again, this time nudging Jace with his elbow and whispering something that made the flight attendant chuckle. They were too far to hear it, but they didn't need to. Darian slowly lifted his gaze, his voice low, calm, measured. He thinks this is about ego, he said. No, Darnell replied, eyes scanning through dormant board connections linked to Orvine Capital. It's about architecture. They redesigned this flight around bias and forgot who built the sky. A faint tremor passed through the plane as a current of turbulence rocked the fuselage. It was slight, barely noticeable to most passengers. But inside the minds of the Creed brothers, the shift had already happened. Darian tapped his watch twice, bringing up the countdown protocol for a covert handover sequence. Are we clear on phase entry? He asked. Darnell nodded once. All nodes ready. Final timing depends on cabin escalation. Victor looked back again, just briefly, almost as if he could feel the change in air. His eyes locked with Darian's for less than 2 seconds, enough to see nothing but composure staring back. He blinked and turned away, shaking his head with a smirk. Some people never learn. And in that moment he became irrelevant. Because beneath the smirk, beyond the cheap superiority, the wheels had already begun turning. Ownership wasn't just possible. It was pending. In silence, the twins finalized network access. Riel's final secure ping read, awaiting activation key. Your airspace, your throne. And then came the final line, spoken not aloud, but embedded in the data trail itself. The moment the glass tipped, the balance shifted. The moment Jace returned, it was clear he hadn't brought service. He'd brought provocation. Without a word, he leaned too close as he handed over the beverages, letting the plastic cup tap hard against Darian's forearm. Careful, he muttered under his breath. The corner of his mouth curled in the kind of smirk meant to provoke, not joke. Darian didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. But the subtle tightening of his jaw gave Darnell all the cue he needed. Darnell's eyes tracked Jace, measured, controlled, as the attendant moved down the aisle. Then, without warning, Jace stepped back and tilted a bottle of water, just enough for its contents to spill directly across Darnell's lap and onto the tablet he was using. No apology. No offer to clean it. No acknowledgement at all. Only a snide remark. Shouldn't bring your little toys on a big flight. The silence in the cabin grew thick. A few passengers looked over, caught between discomfort and indecision. No one intervened. No one asked if they were all right. But the unease was spreading, quietly contagious. Darnell set the tablet down with care, water dripping from the edge. He reached into his carry-on, pulled out a microfiber cloth, and began drying it with methodical precision. Each wipe of the screen was slow, exacting, not out of panic, but to control what boiled beneath his calm. Then, almost imperceptibly, he slid his thumb across the edge of the device, activating a secondary input layer built into its casing. A silent upload began. Every second of the interaction, audio, video, facial recognition, timestamp, was sent directly to Clivon Dynamics' secure legal archive. Within moments, it had been logged, cataloged, and geotagged under a heading only a few executives had clearance to view: hostile conditions, executive travel. Across the aisle, Victor Renner let out a loud, exaggerated chuckle. "Rough day, gentlemen," he said, swirling his champagne glass. "Next time, might want to bring paper towels with those toys." Darian looked over. His voice was calm, but his eyes cut through the distance like frost. "Next time," he replied, "we'll bring change." Darnell didn't look up. He was already sending a discreet signal through the embedded communication strip on his watch. 2 taps, held 3 seconds apart, sent a pre-coded message through the firm's back-end command chain. The phrase appeared silently on Riel Van's tablet, miles away in a ground-level executive suite. Asset wait. Critical. The reply came in under 10 seconds, moving to phase 2. Darian saw the confirmation blink across his own device's inner screen. No sound, no show, just momentum shifting. It had been over 3 years since they'd authorized the dormant protocol that was now quietly reawakening. Designed originally for corporate rescue operations, it had evolved into something more powerful. A digital framework capable of initiating strategic buyouts in response to contract violation, ethics breaches, or acquisition sabotage. It was swift, legal, and surgical. At 37,000 feet, the Creed brothers weren't just passengers anymore. They were operatives. Unaware, Victor continued sipping from his glass as his phone buzzed lightly in his pocket. He slid it out, unlocked it with his thumbprint, and paused. The screen showed a red-flagged portfolio alert from his investment firm. He frowned. A new entity, Velen Trust, was triggering a securities alert under Air Holdings. The alert had been flagged as emerging majority interest, hostile intent possible. He tapped into the detail pane, heart beginning to race. Then he saw it. Clivon Dynamics. Cross-listed shell entities. Rapid share redistribution. His eyes widened. "What the?" he whispered, fingers fumbling across the screen. He looked up, searching for one of the twins, but they were seated with perfect composure, one reading quietly, the other adjusting his cufflinks. Victor turned toward the attendant galley, trying to wave Jace down again. "Hey, something's happening with the firm," he whispered sharply, panic creeping into his voice. "Check your systems." But Jace, unaware and arrogant, waved him off with a shrug. "You've had enough champagne," he muttered. "Relax." Behind them, the cabin continued its low hum, indifferent to the shift under its own wings. Darnell's screen displayed the last confirmation window, legal architecture prepared. Acquisition momentum, active. Final authorization pending. Darian looked out the window, not at the sky, but at the reflection of Jace walking by once more, head held high with the pride of a man who believed he'd won something. The twin didn't turn his head. Instead, he pressed 2 fingers lightly against his watch, paused, and said just loud enough for Darnell to hear, "They kicked the wrong kings off the throne." The tray clattered to the floor. It wasn't an accident. Jace Halden smirked as he passed Darian Creed's aisle, feigning a stumble just close enough to jostle the side of Darian's shoulder with his elbow. A splash of citrus water hit the corner of the seat, trickling down like a stain marking territory. He didn't apologize. He didn't stop. Just a muttered, "Watch yourself," over his shoulder. Darnell saw everything. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted the angle of his tablet and, without a word, swiped the screen twice. Footage from the cabin camera on his lapel-linked watch began streaming to the secure Clivon Dynamic server. Evidence cataloged. Another piece in a legal structure already assembling midair. Across the aisle, Victor Renner chuckled behind a half-lifted champagne flute. His tie loosened, his voice low. "I guess etiquette doesn't travel as well as wealth," he said to no one in particular. His gaze lingered on the twins like they were guests overstaying their welcome. Darian's hand calmly returned to his armrest, but inside, calculations were spiraling. Timing, leverage, exposure. At that exact moment, 30,000 feet below, in a legal operations suite within Clivon Tower, Riel Van was already in motion. The signal had come 23 minutes prior. Asset weight. Critical. He hadn't needed more. Now, Riel's fingers danced across a secured console as he activated pre-coded acquisition protocols buried within Airline's shell structures. Velen Trust and Orvine Capital entities thought dormant, nothing more than forgotten filing stubs in tax registers, came alive with precision. Each move shifted stock. Each approval nudged control closer. Back in the cabin, Darian leaned back, almost relaxed. Almost. His eyes wandered to the cockpit door. A quiet decision formed. Rising from his seat with the unhurried poise of someone who owned every inch of the carpet under his feet, he walked forward. Jace stepped in. "Can I help you?" His tone was flat, artificial. "I'd like to speak with the captain," Darian replied evenly. Jace folded his arms. "That's not allowed, sir. Cabin policy during flight." Darian nodded once, voice still calm. Then recorded that this aircraft's new owners were denied access to their own command staff. Jace blinked, momentarily thrown off by the phrasing. I don't know what that means, but someone else did." The co-pilot, a younger man seated just inside the open cockpit doorway, had caught the words. He looked up sharply. A glance passed between him and Darian, a flicker of recognition, perhaps from news articles or corporate journals. Whatever the case, the young officer didn't speak, but he reached for the intercom. A quiet murmur followed, not loud enough to hear, but heavy enough to shift the air pressure in the room. Darian returned to his seat without a backward glance. Meanwhile, Victor checked his phone again. The in-flight Wi-Fi had stabilized, and with it came the stream of red notifications piling up in his portfolio dashboard. His firm's equity holdings in Air, once steady, had now been tagged unstable asset. A tremor of confusion passed across his face. He opened a subfolder, heart rate quickening. He didn't understand. Yet, Darnell leaned slightly toward his brother. "Riel's final update just hit," he said under his breath. "Control secured. 51%. Darian didn't respond. He just reached down and tapped the flat face of his wristwatch. A glowing interface appeared, then disappeared with a single swipe. Control achieved, Darnell confirmed. Across the aisle, Victor's jaw dropped. His screen was flashing with internal alerts. Two of his largest institutional partners had pulled back Airline exposure in the last 30 minutes. One of them had used the phrase, urgent repositioning based on leaked executive movement. He turned toward the twins, pale now. What's happening? He muttered. They didn't answer. The question wasn't for them anymore. Jace passed again, louder this time, as if volume could restore his slipping confidence. Still enjoying your downgrade, gentlemen? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Darian didn't look up. Enjoying the view, he replied coolly. 30 seconds later, another encrypted message arrived from Riel. The interface on Darnell's screen lit up with a single sentence in green. Signal when ready. Darian reached forward. One tap. No dramatics. No raised voices. Just a command embedded in elegance. Initiate transfer on touchdown. The descent began with a subtle lurch, just enough for the cabin lights to flicker once, as the plane dipped into Telvain City's airspace. No one screamed. No seatbelt signs chimed with urgency. But something heavier than turbulence moved through first class. A tension not born of altitude, but of consequences coiled tight beneath tailored suits and tightened smiles. Victor Renner, lounging in the seat that hadn't been his to claim, sat upright. His fingers tapped rapidly at his phone, trying to access his firm's internal investment dashboard. Pages loaded slower than usual. Signal interruption, or perhaps the universe whispering that control had already slipped through his hands. He glanced back toward Darian and Darnell Creed, still seated in silence, still unreadable. For the first time since takeoff, Victor's smirk faltered. Meanwhile, Jace Halden leaned across the aisle with his usual swagger, laughing quietly with another male flight attendant. The twins are probably used to coach anyway, he muttered with a dismissive chuckle. The crewman chuckled back, but his eyes darted nervously to the seated brothers. Jace didn't notice. He never did. Darnell felt the vibration first, a single, discreet ping on his wristwatch. He glanced down without moving his head. The screen glowed blue for half a second, then displayed a simple line of text. Welcome. Velen Trust Executive Access confirmed. Biometric protocols synced. He inhaled once, eyes steady. Their ownership was no longer theoretical. It was encoded, active, final. The airline belonged to them now. Still, they waited. Jace sauntered back down the aisle, lips curled like he was still in control. In one hand, he held a folded comment card. With mock politeness, he stopped beside Darian and placed it neatly on the tray table, brushing Darian's sleeve on purpose. If you'd like to leave feedback, he said smugly, his voice dipping into sarcasm. We value your experience. Darian looked up slowly. His smile was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, but was sharper because of it. Oh, we will. For a moment, Jace didn't move. Perhaps he expected an argument, complaint, even a sarcastic jab in return. But the silence unnerved him more. He turned and walked away, shoulders squared a little too tightly. Then the intercom clicked. The captain's voice came through, clipped and controlled, but not the same rehearsed tone passengers had heard earlier. This one was cautious, formal, calculated. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank our guests for flying Air, he said, the words coming a little slower than usual. Now under new executive leadership. Please remain seated until taxi is complete. Silence fell. It wasn't confusion, it was realization. Victor froze mid-scroll, eyes darting from the announcement speaker to his phone and back again. His jaw worked uselessly, as if preparing a protest he didn't know how to voice. The color drained from his face. His screen refreshed just in time to display a banner across his firm's holdings. Air. Status. Executive transfer confirmed. Jace, halfway through handing out a final towel, stopped cold. He blinked twice, then turned back toward the Creed brothers. The grin was gone. In its place was something hollow, a question he couldn't ask. a truth he wasn't ready to face. He stared at Darian, then at Darnell. They said nothing, not yet, because what came next required more than words. It required landing. The sky itself had bowed to their signature. As the wheels of the Air flight screeched against the tarmac and the aircraft jolted softly into its deceleration, Darian Creed tapped a single command into his watch. Ownership protocol transfer, activate ground notification. No words, no motion beyond the quiet execution of a code that had been years in the making. The signal beamed through encrypted channels, hitting the receivers at Telvane City's executive terminal with surgical precision. Inside Gate 3A, Rielvan stood already in place, composed and unreadable, flanked by two sharp-suited legal advisors and the silent bulk of Air's corporate security chief. He didn't check his phone. He didn't have to. The update lit up the terminal's internal network, initiating a cascade of silent alerts that rippled through Air's chain of command like an invisible tremor. On board the plane, none of this was visible, but everything was already changing. In row 4B, Darnell's watch vibrated with confirmation. He turned the screen slightly toward his brother. Access granted. Creed-level authorization confirmed. He didn't smile. He didn't move. Instead, he pulled up the crew roster on his screen and began quietly opening internal employee files now available under executive visibility. Jace Halden appeared near the top, filed under primary crew, flagged conduct. The profile showed 3 formal complaints: biased behavior, passenger mistreatment. One incident remained unresolved, buried in a system that prioritized staffing quotas over accountability. Darnell uploaded the footage he had captured earlier. The water spilled across his tablet, the mocking tone, the dismissive posture. Each clip now had a timestamp and crew tag embedded. The data was sent directly to Air's review database under a new classification: Post-Acquisition Executive Review. Across the aisle, Victor Renner shifted nervously. The banker's screen glowed faintly in the dimming cabin light. He refreshed his investor portal once. Then again. His jaw twitched. A red exclamation mark had appeared beside his firm's Air stake. Status: unstable asset. Movement pending regulatory flag. He looked up, breath shallow, then shot a glance toward the twins, eyes darting with the panic of someone realizing he'd laughed too early. "What's going on?" Victor muttered aloud, voice rising as much from dread as confusion. His fingers trembled as he clutched the edge of the seat back, but no one responded. Not yet. Darian finally lifted his eyes, face composed like a man delivering a verdict rather than an answer. "Check your investor portal," he said. The sentence struck with surgical weight. Victor's face collapsed inward, as if the numbers on his screen had punched him square in the gut. He slumped back into his seat. Across the cabin, Jace Halden noticed the sudden shift in energy. The atmosphere had thickened, and for once, he wasn't at the center of attention. He stepped forward, trying to assert himself, grasping for the old authority that had, moments ago, let him mock his passengers without fear. "Is something happening?" he asked, forcing a tight grin, his voice cracking slightly. Darnell didn't look up immediately. He finished tagging the final entry into Jace's profile, then pressed Submit Report. The file locked into the central system with a green notification bar. Received, Priority Status Executive Flag. Now he looked up. His tone was calm, his posture still, but every word landed like an undeniable verdict. "Welcome to your performance review." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded with history, with strategy, with every decision that had led to this point. And in that silence, even the engines seemed to hum lower, like they too knew the cabin no longer belonged to the same men who had boarded hours ago. The cabin doors hissed open with a mechanical whisper, barely audible over the sudden, unnatural stillness that had settled in first class. The silence felt heavy, taut like a string stretched to its limit. Then came the echo of polished shoes on the jet bridge, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Rielvan was the first to board, flanked on either side by a flight operations manager and a sharp-eyed man with a silver badge clipped to his inner blazer. Air's head of corporate security. His presence wasn't ceremonial. It was surgical. Riel said nothing at first. His eyes scanned the cabin like a strategist inspecting a battlefield that had already been claimed. He walked with purpose until he stood before Darian and Darnell Creed. "Full executive rights confirmed," Riel said simply, handing Darian a leather-bound confirmation dossier. His voice was calm, but final, like a gavel falling in a courtroom. Darian accepted the file with a small nod. He didn't look back. Movement from the side, Jace Halden. The flight attendant stepped forward quickly, his face flushed. He reached toward Riel as if trying to wedge himself between protocol and consequence. "Sir, there must be some Ms." But the security officer intercepted him with a hand to the shoulder, firm but respectful. "Mr. Halden," he said, his tone all professional chill. "You're requested for immediate debriefing. You may pack your things." Jace froze. His eyes darted to the passengers, to the cockpit, then to the twins. Disbelief overtook him. His mouth opened as if to argue, but the words didn't come. Behind them, Victor Renner unbuckled his seatbelt in a subtle, practiced movement. He didn't rise immediately, but shifted as if planning to melt into the crowd. It was a miscalculation. 2 airport security personnel waited just outside the cabin threshold. One of them stepped in as Victor approached the door. "Mr. Renner?" the man asked. "You'll need to remain for a few minutes. We have questions regarding flagged transactions sent during the flight." Victor's face tightened. "That's absurd. The officer held up a palm. "Just a few questions, sir. Please cooperate." Riel turned slightly, his voice edged with polite menace. "Your firm triggered insider trading algorithms tied to flight path and ownership records. That alone warrants inquiry. Unless, of course, you'd prefer it be handled publicly." Victor sat back down. "Fast." Meanwhile, Darnell rose slowly from his seat, adjusted the lapel pin on his suit, and offered a brief handshake to the flight operations manager. The man's grip was firm, respectful, and a little nervous. Darnell's expression gave nothing away. The other passengers watched all this unfold like spectators at a play whose plot had shifted without warning. Confusion knitted their brows. A few reached for their phones, unsure if they were witnessing a security threat or a corporate coup. Then came the tipping point. Outside the aircraft, reporters who had gathered for an unrelated press arrival caught sight of Riel van, and moments later, recognized the Creed brothers, the twin CEOs of Clivon Dynamics. The expressions on the journalists' faces flipped from passive interest to burning curiosity. They surged forward, cameras lifted, questions firing like sparks. Inside, an Air staffer tried to stall the reporters, until one of them received a tip notification. Then another. 5 minutes later, headlines lit up digital news platforms like dominoes falling in perfect sync. Creed brothers acquire airline mid-flight after VIP discrimination incident. Air faces backlash after executive passengers reassigned for banker. Footage shows flight attendant mocking twins before company ownership flipped. Inside the cabin, Jace Halden stood stiff, eyes locked on his own name now flashing on one of the passengers' open tablets. Video of his earlier behavior had already gone viral. One clip showed him sneering while spilling water. Another had captured his dismissive tone on full audio. Air's legal team, likely scrambling in a boardroom somewhere, issued an official statement before the sun even touched the horizon. But the brothers were already ahead of it. In a short clip recorded just outside the cabin, Darian stood calmly before a cluster of microphones and said the words that would echo across the industry by nightfall. "Dignity doesn't wait for clearance." They laughed, confident their privilege would go unchallenged, unaware that every move, every protocol, and every witness was about to be overturned by strategy and ownership. If you believe entitlement always collapses under calculated power, hit subscribe now because justice never waits. By nightfall, the emergency board session had already begun. The digital conference room was tense, filled with the blue-lit profiles of Air's senior executives, all dialed in from distant corners of the country. At the top of the screen, seated with sharp posture and steady eyes, was Riel van, acting legal overseer of the new ownership transition. He didn't blink often, He didn't need to. The numbers on the documents in front of him were louder than any argument that might have formed. The board knew it. The silence was weighty. Darian and Darnell Creed were not present on the call. Not yet. They were in their Telvane City penthouse suite, seated across from each other at a polished obsidian table, light from the city below casting soft reflections on their expressions. They said little. The mood in the room was quiet, calculated. A shared laptop screen displayed a live shareholder stream interface, its countdown ticking steadily toward 0. The moment had arrived. As the live stream launched, millions of shareholders and intrigued viewers tuned in across networks and platforms. The Creed brothers appeared centered and poised, flanked only by the subtle backdrop of a city that shimmered in the twilight. Darian leaned slightly forward, his fingers loosely steepled, and began with calm precision. "We didn't come here to punish," he said. His tone carried not rage, but clarity, one honed through years of negotiation rooms and boardroom standoffs. "We came here to correct." There was no theatrics, no raised voice, and yet the message hit with more force than any condemnation could have. Comments flooded in from shareholders expressing shock, support, disbelief. A live ticker ran beneath the screen. Airline, new leadership confirmed. Ethics overhaul begins. Behind the camera feed, Darnell clicked through documents streaming into their secured server. Internal HR logs had just arrived, full access, real-time, and what they saw darkened both of their expressions. Jace Halden had 3 prior discrimination complaints on record. One involved a couple removed from first class over a seating dispute. Another included a quiet accusation from a new higher flight attendant, never followed up. The third, a similar demotion of a non-white business passenger, dismissed after a 5-minute meeting. In each case, the resolution field read, "Complication avoided, staffing priority." Darnell's jaw tightened. They covered for him. Darian nodded. Not anymore. The cost of that oversight was now visible in real numbers, nearly $6 million in early cancellation penalties, a plummeting brand sentiment index, and 3 class action lawsuits forming in real time on public forums. The system they had inherited was crumbling, and it had started with one denial at a gate. Meanwhile, Victor Renner's name began trending for all the wrong reasons. The smug banker, who had sipped champagne from their stolen seats, now found himself suspended indefinitely by his investment firm. A flood of messages revealed he had texted sensitive airline stock information midair, ironically during his moment of mockery. Securities compliance teams flagged his portfolio. Investigations were underway. The irony wasn't lost on the twins. Back in the suite, Darnell leaned back, reviewing incoming comments from passengers who had been on that flight. One by one, testimonials began appearing online, strangers recalling how they had watched, in real time, 2 composed men endure mistreatment without raising their voices. One post read, "They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they sat in silence, and somehow I still felt the whole cabin shift." Another, "He asked for a menu and got mocked, but the look on his face, I knew he wasn't done." The videos, quietly uploaded from Darnell's tablet and watch, had gone viral. Jace Halden's tone, the snide remarks, the water accident, even Victor's smug commentary, every moment documented, every piece of evidence irrefutable. In a moment between segments, Darnell turned slightly to his brother, his voice quiet. "We could have reacted like they expected us to," he said, the memory of that cabin still present in his eyes. Darian didn't look away from the screen, but he nodded, his reply spoken low and firm. "But instead, we reminded them what power really looks like." On that night, Airline's internal systems updated their homepage to reflect new leadership. Crew notifications lit up with an invitation to mandatory ethics training under the new regime. Shareholders received an email with a message that bore the new company slogan, one drafted that very evening by the twins, their legal counsel, and their PR lead. The message was clear, placed front and center above the airline's crest, and shared across every company portal and social platform. "Respect is not optional. It's our altitude." The announcement came not in a boardroom or press conference, but through a line of code silently uploaded mid-flight, a code that triggered Air's new era. A week later, inside the company's flagship operations center, a monitor blinked to life with a new designation: Project Vantage, active. The room was dim, lit by the blue glow of dashboards tracking everything from flight routes to cabin crew behavior. In one corner, a newly installed AI-driven system began processing real-time cabin interactions, assessing verbal tone, proximity violations, and service response delays. It wasn't invasive, but it was exact. A digital conscience embedded into every aircraft. Darian Creed stood in that room in silence, arms folded, his reflection caught in the glass wall separating him from the engineering team. His voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. No one's dignity should depend on who's watching. His words weren't for the room, they were for himself. A reminder. Across the city, Darnell Creed reviewed another schematic, the redesigned cabin layout for Air's Prestige class. The new blueprint removed the ambiguous upgrade tier system, replacing it with a verified booking lock, untouchable once confirmed. The days of bumping clients by discretion were over. That same morning, a private HR hearing was underway. Jace Halden sat across from a panel of internal ethics officers, flanked by a legal observer. His arms were crossed, chin held high, but the footage didn't lie. Clips of his conduct played on loop. The deliberate water spill, the mocking tone, the ignored call buttons. For each, timestamps were cross-referenced with passenger statements. When the footage showing Jace bumping Darian's arm played, Jace opened his mouth, then closed it. The panel said nothing. A red indicator beside his name changed from pending to terminated. The documentation was forwarded to press within the hour. Meanwhile, Darian met with Marlon Dorr in a high-rise conference room overlooking Telvane City's skyline. Marlon, a former pilot who had left the industry after whistleblowing on a racial profiling incident 5 years prior, sat with his old flight badge resting quietly beside his new ethics officer ID. "You sure you want me back in the airspace?" he asked, half smiling. "That's exactly why," Darian replied. "We don't need silence. We need memory." Marlon nodded, emotion flickering behind his stoic eyes. He accepted the folder, Project Vantage, Implementation Lead. The program would place discrete AI monitors aboard long-haul flights, trained not to punish, but to log. The goal wasn't surveillance. It was accountability. At the same time, Darnell launched a back-end review of over 300 passenger complaints logged over the previous 18 months, many of them eerily similar. Unexplained reassignments, dismissive staff, service denial based on behavior. Each was sorted, anonymized, then reopened with an offer for claim resubmission. This wasn't just an audit. It was a reckoning. Riel Van, ever efficient, finalized new compliance protocols. His message to the unions was clear. "We're not removing your protections. We're upgrading them." There was resistance, briefly, but when the revised benefits plan dropped, including higher hazard pay, better rest rotation policies, and mental health support, even the skeptics took pause. And once Jace's termination file was released, with its formal findings on bias and breach of conduct, calls for protest died quietly. Meanwhile, the system flagged Victor Renner's record for behavior-based reassessment. He was no longer welcome in Air's Prestige class, not because of who he was, but how he had behaved. His name joined a small, private database known internally as the Civic Fit List. Access wasn't blocked, but access was no longer blind. In the first test flight under Project Vantage, a crew member hesitated when a young black engineer asked to store his laptop in the premium section. The hesitation was logged. The delay noted. When the crew member returned 5 minutes later to correct it, the system had already filed a soft review. No punishment, just a note. That night, he reviewed his own metrics. The next day, his service time improved by 12%. Darnell watched the data silently. The system didn't need to scream to create change. It only needed to see. In a follow-up press briefing, Darian stood before a wall of microphones. "We're not running an airline," he said, his voice calm, clipped, certain. "We're reshaping how dignity travels." He didn't wait for applause. He didn't need it. Outside the terminal, two former passengers from Flight 714 stood, watching the live stream through a shop window. One turned to the other and said, "That's them, the ones from the story." Inside, Darnell opened the latest report from the AI ethics pilot. 30 flagged moments, 20 adjusted in real time. The system wasn't perfect, but it was working. Slowly, the altitude was changing. And back in the operations room, the AI monitor pulsed once more, steady, watching, fair. Even the skeptics knew something had changed at 30,000 feet. The moment the headline hit the monitors inside the forward lounge, Darnell Creed didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward on the polished darkwood counter of the converted terminal lobby and slowly exhaled, watching the press gather beyond the glass. Airline had just released its quarterly satisfaction metrics, highest in 5 years. The same airline that had once displaced him and his brother from their rightful seats now stood as a global example of leadership reform. But neither twin sought applause. The numbers weren't a victory lap. They were proof that silence, restraint, and strategy still had the power to eclipse prideful noise. Across the room, Darian adjusted the frame of a newly mounted portrait. It wasn't of him or his brother, but of Arvin Kale, their late mentor, standing in front of a chalkboard filled with aeronautical diagrams. The plaque beneath read, "Vision rises when ego steps aside." Behind them, a small group of scholarship recipients from the newly launched Arvin Kale Fellowship were gathering for orientation. Young black men in press suits, each carrying dreams of flight, engineering, and legacy. Among them, a lean 17-year-old with almond skin and close-cut hair lingered near the podium, his gaze fixed on the twins. "You're Laron Vance," Darnell said, stepping toward him. The teen stood a little straighter. "Yes, sir. I watched you walk off that flight. The video, the way you didn't react, just walked. That's what leadership looks like." Darnell didn't smile, but the corners of his eyes softened. "Then remember this, Laron. Sometimes the loudest move is made without a sound." Outside, reporters waited in designated areas, not for a press conference. They hadn't been promised one, but for something more telling: presence. The forward lounge had quietly replaced Velker International's old VIP terminal, the very space where the Creed brothers had once been denied dignity. Now, under Darnell's private acquisition and redesign, it pulsed with press ethics briefings, aviation transparency roundtables, and quiet but deliberate reform. Every inch of the space bore their fingerprints, from the accessibility codes woven into its smart architecture to the AI panel embedded in the floor that automatically adjusted acoustics during interviews. It was here that Reeve Tanner, the young gate agent who had once reassigned their seats, walked in with stiff shoulders and a reassignment request. His presence was noted immediately by security but not challenged. He had come voluntarily, asking for consideration into Airline's ethics retraining pathway. He had read the story. He had seen the fallout. But what had stuck with him was that neither Darian nor Darnell had ever called for his name in public. They could have. They hadn't. Inside a side room, Reeve now sat across from a compliance coordinator. A quiet man with thick glasses and a subtle drone embedded in his collar scanned each statement Reeve made. The review would be fair but firm. Reeve's future wasn't guaranteed, but neither was it closed. Meanwhile, Darnell paced the lower level of the lounge where media rooms were being prepped for a new series titled Altitude Ethics. Flight captains, behavior analysts, and policymakers would discuss in detail what had gone wrong in cabins across the country and how to fix it. A digital wall displayed previous airline bias cases from the last 2 years. At the bottom of the list was Air Flight 417. There's no identifiers, no names, just the footage, the timestamp, and the change it sparked. Upstairs, Darian was reviewing the next set of scholarship applications. His hand paused over one from a student in Eldenport who had written, "I want to build wings that never need to apologize for where they sit." Darian circled the application and placed it on the accepted pile. Suddenly, a soft chime rang from the terminal's public screen feed. A breaking update scrolled across the screen in bold. Forward Lounge to host Global Aviation Ethics Summit. Within minutes, requests for access flooded their PR line. Journalists who once ignored the story now wanted in. Former executives who dismissed cabin bias as PR clutter now requested speaking slots. And crew members who had feared retaliation for speaking out now applied for the mentorship panel. Change, it seemed, had chosen a new runway. Later that night, as the terminal emptied and the city lights cast long reflections against the glass walls, Darian and Darnell sat quietly in the observation hall. They watched the tarmac stretch into horizon lines of possibility.
No ceremony.
No stage, Darnell said softly. Darian shook his head. Just work. A pause. Then Darnell added, almost as if remembering something distant. You know what still gets me? He thought we were invisible. Darian's voice was calm, steady. Then we gave him the view from a CEO's window. The screens dimmed, the lounge settled, and the night shifted quietly toward the next dawn. The terminal that once ignored them now speaks in their voice. I still remember the way he dropped that card, Darnell muttered, staring at the edge of the hotel suite's low-lit coffee table, his voice low and deliberate. The feedback card, crisp, untouched, rested there now, a quiet artifact of arrogance. The same one Jace Halden had slid across the tray table without eye contact, without care 6 months ago. That day still rang in his memory like turbulence after silence. Darian sat across from him on the balcony, overlooking the glittering skyline of Telvain City. His posture was composed, but there was tension in the way his thumb circled the rim of his glass. A silent current ran beneath them both, memory, power, and unfinished business. Hours earlier, the Creed twins had hosted a closed-door roundtable with a dozen airline executives, federal aviation regulators, and key civil rights advocates. The invitation-only gathering took place in the forward conference wing of the Airline Executive Tower. Ironically, a building that once excluded their influence. Now their voices echoed through its boardrooms.
No cameras. No reporters.
Just policy, silence, and the weight of reckoning. The room had been tense at first. Most attendees arrived expecting an aggressive takedown of industry failures. Instead, they found two black CEOs speaking not with rage, but with precision. Darian's voice was calm, his words measured. This isn't about punishment, he began. It's about recalibration. If the system cannot recognize the patterns, then the pattern must become the lesson. Midway through the session, the room fell into a charged quiet when Darian leaned forward and added, almost as an afterthought, power doesn't mean you speak louder. It means you don't flinch when silence is your defense. There was no reaction at first, just stillness. But someone, an assistant from one of the attending firms, typed it into their notes, forwarded it to a comms team, and within hours, the quote surfaced in media headlines. Now, as twilight softened the suite in golden blue, that quote ran in a news ticker along the bottom of the television screen. Darnell watched it scroll slowly beneath a headline about crew integrity compliance modules being tested by competing airlines. Their reform, what was unofficially dubbed the Creed Standard, had already begun to ripple outward. You realize what that means, right? Darnell asked, breaking the quiet. Darian glanced at him. What? They're adjusting without permission. No press release. No lawsuits. Just copying. Quietly. Good, Darian said. That's how systems actually change. Not by noise. By code. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with a sense of control earned, not granted. The very idea that Jace, once untouchable behind a uniform and a smirk, had been replaced by a protocol more ethical than his conduct, and that Victor Renner's investment firm had issued an internal review because of a single mid-air transaction, meant the sky was no longer theirs to gatekeep. A soft ping came from Darian's tablet. He reached over and opened the notification. It was a private summary of the day's roundtable, off the record, but someone had attached an internal memo. Adopt Creed Conflict Training Model. Phase 1. Start date. Next quarter. A second message followed from Marlon Dorr, their appointed director of Project Vantage. AI monitor trials complete. Passenger response greater than 94% approval. Rollout clean. Below that, a surprising file appeared. A review request from Velker International. The very airport that once reduced them to silence now sought their guidance on equitable access design. Darnell let out a dry chuckle. "He thought we were invisible," he repeated, tapping the feedback card lightly. Darian turned toward him, eyes sharp but quiet. "Then we gave him the view from a CEO's window." The moment lingered, quiet, resonant, final. A television broadcast in the background rolled out new headlines. Air named industry ethics leader. Passenger Bill of Rights updated under new Creed leadership. Major airlines consider reform council. The storm had passed, but the sky remembered. One mistake in the sky recharted the course of how equity lands. The camera cuts in on movement, slow, deliberate footsteps against a polished cabin floor. Darian and Darnell Creed walk side by side through the rebranded Air jet at sunrise, the quiet hum of the grounded aircraft beneath their soles. They pass rows of upgraded seating, each aisle now tailored with neutral access design. No hidden tiers, no silent downgrades. Morning light pours through the oval windows, casting soft gold across the leather upholstery. Neither brother speaks at first. There's only the calm rhythm of movement, the subtle breath of a cabin reborn. They stop at the same row they were removed from 1 year earlier. The seatbacks are pristine now, fitted with integrated privacy screens and redesigned armrests, features they once had to argue to reclaim. But what holds their attention is not the leather or the tech. It's the memory sealed into the air, the sting of dismissal, the silent refusal, the smirk on Victor Renner's face, the muttered insult from Jace Halden. Here, in these two seats, their dignity was disrupted. And here, 1 year later, they returned not as passengers, but as owners. Darian carries a brushed aluminum plaque in his left hand, engraved in deep navy lettering. He holds it for a moment, thumb brushing over the final line. Then, without ceremony, he affixes it to the wall beside the row, where no passenger can miss it, yet no crew can remove it. Reserved for those who remember where they weren't welcome, and returned with the keys. For a moment, silence holds them again. But it's not the silence of rejection anymore. It's the silence of clarity. A distant knock echoes down the aisle. Marlon Dorr, the newly appointed ethics director, nods from the far end, signaling that the press team is ready to begin boarding for the documentary's closing shots. The film, Skybound, the flight that changed everything, has already stirred international attention with its pre-release teasers. Narrated by those who witnessed the transformation, it doesn't glorify vengeance. It narrates evolution, restraint, precision, the strategic genius of two men who refused to shout when the world expected fury. "They'll ask us about this plaque," Darnell murmurs without turning. Darian's lips barely move. "Let them." They step back in sync. The aisle stretches before them like a runway, both literal and symbolic. Every row they pass holds a moment of transition, from insult to insight, from silence to standards. Crew integrity protocols are now named after them. Project Vantage has been adopted by 6 additional airlines. Flight attendants now undergo cultural calibration audits, tracked by onboard AI with anonymized feedback. This wasn't just a revenge story. It was architecture. Outside, cameras wait. Reporters, former critics, now advocates, prepare their live feeds. Somewhere, Victor Renner is still facing financial inquiry. Jace Halden's name has become synonymous with what not to do at 30,000 feet. But none of that matters now. Because this moment, this walk, this plaque, this sunrise belongs to a deeper kind of victory. Darnell pauses at the door, hand resting on the frame. "Think they'll ever understand how much they taught us that day?" Darian exhales slowly. "They don't need to." Behind them, the plaque catches the light. Ahead of them, a world now watching. The camera holds as the brothers step off the aircraft, backlit by the rising sun, their silhouettes framed against the golden cabin glow. A final voiceover plays, calm, steady, unmistakably Creed. In the air, there are no shortcuts. Every altitude must be earned. And now, everyone flies forward. Because when respect is denied at takeoff, we land with ownership. They blocked the CEOs and froze as the twins completed the purchase mid-flight, asserting control over the airline and everyone on board. If you believe real authority doesn't ask permission, it enforces. Subscribe now because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights racism, entitlement, and the dramatic consequences when prejudice meets power and strategy. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respecting every individual, regardless of status or background.